ADD, ADHD, the connection to trauma is very linked. And so what may look like an inability to pay attention, kind of distractibility, anxiety, that's a trauma response. And, he must have ADD, ADHD. It drives me insane. If you've been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and you wonder what the hell does that even mean, I will clarify that in this video first and foremost. Often very easily misunderstood. And I will try to make it as simple as I possibly can. ADD and ADHD as a diagnosis is, and most of Western medicine really understands diagnosis as a symptom labeling process. What does that mean? Is that if you've got these 9 different criteria of symptoms, then you have the diagnosis. And at first glance, it seems to make sense, but underneath it's like, wait a minute. So if I have inability to pay attention and I am often jumping from thing to thing to thing, and I report anxiety and have difficulty in school and these things, you must have ADD, ADHD. Well, what if something else explains those exact same symptoms, but has a different underlying cause? And so that is the biggest criticism I have as a licensed psychologist. And somewhere in this nightmare behind me of books, I do have a DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is a big book of crazy. It is basically the list of all of the recognized psychiatric disorders by these panel of psychiatrists that the DSM has gotten together and said, this is what crazy means. And again, it is a list of symptoms. And so if you have a flat affect and you have a difficulty getting out of bed and your loss of appetite and you have these things, you meet the criteria for depression, where the underlying cause may be, thyroid. And so it is this nightmare for those of us trying to really get below the surface of what it means to be a human being and really looking at the big picture of what it means to be a human being. And Western medicine, I don't want to get on too much of a soapbox, but Western medicine is really a symptom management process. It is not a cure. They're not trying to get to the underlying causes of things. What they're trying to do is get rid of your symptoms, because if we get rid of these symptoms, then you won't have the diagnosis. And so it is a very, very, very sick care system, literally. And so if you fall into the category of ADD, ADHD, and you're like, well, here's a pill that will actually help you not have those symptoms. It must be a cure. No, it is not a cure. It is something that actually manages symptoms. So symptom management is the greatest criticism. Most really good psychologists that are really trying to get to the underlying causes of things have an issue with. And again, it is an insurance-based model, meaning that the insurance loves to have a checklist of things that, they're less of this and less of this and less of this, and therefore they don't need it anymore. They don't need expensive therapy anymore. They can just take a pill. So all you have to do in all of these things that you notice in society is follow the money. And so ADD, ADHD, the connection to trauma is very linked. And so what may look like an inability to pay attention, kind of distractibility, anxiety, that's a trauma response. You have those symptoms as a 9-year-old and, he must have ADD, ADHD. Forget the fact that his parents are getting divorced and his, whatever. And so it drives me insane. If you meet the criteria for ADD, ADHD, go a little deeper on it. Dive below the surface and really try to guess at the underlying cause. I wrote a book called Driven, and what the book is about is really the adaptation that the human species seems to go through, and I'll qualify this as there's no way to really do hardcore research around it because you'd have to, really do split tests of traumatizing one group of kids and not the other. They don't let us do that. But very simply for you want to get to an underlying deeper understanding of really what is causing these symptoms in you. And so you want to look deeper. You want to go into kind of understanding causality and causality versus correlation. So correlation means things go together, and that is, people who drink milk get depressed. Well, that's true. But most people drink milk. So it's like the correlation is, they vary together, but they don't necessarily interact. And so that is correlation. Causality is literally something happens in time, and then at a later date, could be 5 minutes, could be 5 years, something is occurring because of that. And so in psychology, we have a really hard time making strong connections, causality. And so, the medical model loves that, the scientific method. Well, what causes depression? And that is a great example of my criticism of psychology and really the Western medicine model. What causes depression? And I'll say it directly. If you suffer from depression, it is a normal, natural, biological reaction to the perception that your world is hopeless and helpless. And so again, I'll say it. It is supposed to happen if you're perceiving the world as winter time. There's a clue, meaning that what animal gets depressed come October every year, November every year? Bears. They go into hibernation. Why? Because their external environment, snow's coming. It's going to cover up all my food. All my resources are getting depleted. Secondary is it can freeze me to death. And so there's a genuine threat to my well-being. So resources and that goes away. And Yogi and Boo Boo and all the other bears are also retreating to their caves. So I have this isolation. You do that to human beings. You do that to my Labrador retriever. You do that to any animal. They're going to have a natural cascade of their central nervous system. Norepinephrine's going to drop. That's your energy source. And then your serotonin and your dopamine are also going to cascade with it to protect you from this dangerous environment that's coming. And wait till spring, wait till it's hopeful again, and then that depression will lift. And, I don't have time to be depressed. And that's something that, makes me insane with my clients, particularly, my drivens. We'll talk about that too, but I don't have time for it. But, the classic question, and if you've ever had depression, it's a very simple question. Is your life depressing? Have you got enough friends? Have you got enough, free time? Have you got some purpose in your life? Well, no. You're supposed to get depressed. You're supposed to feel crappy because of that. So that's normal. Again, that is normal. Well, here's some medication that we can take, and it's a medical diagnosis. And that is, true clinical depression when it really gets into the loop. But when this operating system up here is collaborating or feeding information down to this one that validates the emotion. And so this is the classic, depressive style of thinking is hopelessness and helplessness. And so I feel like no one likes me. I feel like my job is really going nowhere. I really don't feel like I have enough money. That triggers this neocortex, this monkey mind, to validate it. Confirmation bias, to look for evidence that, yeah, those feelings are real. And that creates this loop between these two operating systems that, and this is the trick, bears don't have an issue with their perception like human beings do. And I'll say it in other videos coming up, but even more deeply, we're all living in a simulation, not some computer system in the sky, but literally an organic computer system that we see what we feel. And if you don't know that, you are stuck in this confirmation bias loop. And so it feels like wintertime. It looks like wintertime. It's always going to stay wintertime. And there's no way I can get out of it. That will create a death spiral. And so it's, I don't minimize it, and I'm not against medications. I'm really not. I think some of them are amazing in the capacity to actually help change the thinking around, is it really wintertime? Well, I don't have the energy to get out of bed. And so it can help you have the energy to actually start acting more like it's springtime. If you start acting more like it's springtime and you're doing the cognitive questioning around, your biases, well, it looks like wintertime, but is it? And you start to orient to the positive. You start to look for things that give you evidence that actually springtime's coming around. You start to feel better. And so, one of my teachers always said that this is a 100 million-year-old organic healing machine. But, I have 57 years of screwing it up. So getting out of the way of actually the biology and letting this thing repair itself and heal itself. We don't need to throw pills at it. Specifically when it comes to ADD and ADHD and this driven thing, I get clients that are workaholics and they come in and they can't stop. The direct line of connection between not being able to stop and trauma and what may look like ADD or ADHD, there's this thing in the brain called the septum. And they know a lot about it because apparently if you take take rhesus monkeys and you put them under a blade and you take this part of the brain out, they turn into little rage monsters and they just tear everything apart. So the septum is the thing that keeps us from actually enraging, or it's a very interesting part of the brain that turns some things on and other things off. And so the way the human beings work, that we have two operating systems, that we got this recording device down here, and we got this neocortex up here, working at the same time, independently for the most part. And so this thing is looking for threat constantly, puts this giant invisible radar out to the world, and when it sees a threat, boom, it turns off this, and we go into fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, or, we trigger these trauma responses to keep us safe. When there is no threat, it's designed to go into rest, restore, heal, where this thing then can think about all the wonderful things that are happening right now and you're present. And again, they're working simultaneously. Best example, you're listening to the radio, you got a cup of coffee, you're driving in your car, all of a sudden somebody swerves into your lane and it's like, whoa. It automatically caught that trigger and took you off control of your life for a second, kept you safe, preserved you, then you come back into safety. This thing, and again, it's automatic. And so the septum, interesting part of the brain. I got a lot of guys that, run their whole lives. Like, it's remarkable how much some human beings can do when they're under a trauma response when it comes to the septum. So little rabbit, always looking for shadows of hawks. You see a, pointy beak, two wings, could be a pigeon, or a hawk, it's registered as danger. Something flies over, sees a shadow, boom, triggers this response in the body runs, goes down the rabbit hole, everything's safe, comes hopping back out. It's back thinking about grass and making a little bunnies. One afternoon, this little rabbit is watching the sunset, and as the sun's going down, oh, how beautiful, here comes this hawk, talons reaching out, just about to grab it by the head, and it goes, what's that sound? And ducks just as the hawk rips its ears off. This septum kicks in. And so again, it's to turn off emotion. It's to turn off the rage response. It's to turn off this thing that wouldn't serve us under extreme stress. And so this rabbit, this septum kicks in, and what it does, it turns on that we got buckets of energy. This rabbit comes to life, but it doesn't feel the pain. It's numb. And why? Because if it, oh my God, my ears hurt so bad, the hawk could come around and eat it. So it turns this stuff off, supercharges the brain too. Visual acuity's up, your hearing's up, your vigilance is on guard, but you're not in any pain. And you start to run. And you're just kicking in life. And, you know, that kicking in life thing gets to a point where you can literally run your body to death. You know, did long course triathlon for 10 years following a divorce when I was 32 years old. Interesting how what I did right after the divorce is I started running and I ran. It's a big swim bike run. So I was trying to burn off this energy, you know, and it again, going back to the depression talk, it gets into a loop if you're not careful. Meaning that, you know, I talk about it in my book Driven, but, you know, when I finally get this project done or this thing done, then I'll be able to relax. Or, you know, when I finally get to summer vacation, when Friday finally gets here, then I'll relax. But what happens when Friday gets here or you get on vacation is you turn your vacations into crazy land. How much can we get done in 7 days? And so it just is a testament to the human body and its ability to survive, but we get stuck in this survival mode. And that survival mode, why? Why do we get stuck in it? Again, you got this energy and you got this stuff and this impulse to do more, to do. And you can get into the cognitive bias, believing that the more I do, the safer I'll be, and the safer I'll be, then I can finally relax. But again, it's coming from here. It's not coming from reality. Again, we're in this simulation. We're seeing what we feel, and it feels like we're never doing enough. And so, going back to the rabbit, this rabbit is running. What happens when he actually goes down the rabbit hole is the septum starts to relax a little bit. And this allows for this emotion from the past to start to come up. Here comes the pain and here comes this. And so human beings jump right out of that rabbit hole and start running again. And so the connection to trauma and, you know, a lot of what I deal with, what is often misunderstood and misdiagnosed as ADD, ADHD, you have an inability to focus, you hyperfocus, you get so much done, you're bouncing from wall to wall to wall. Yeah, you meet all the criteria, but you really don't have this driven brain necessarily. You may, but it's just a reaction to a trauma experience. Well, I don't have any trauma. This may have happened really young. May have happened in the schoolyard. You don't even know it, you know, and you don't remember it. And that's a very typical trauma response. When the septum kicks in, the hypothalamus, this thing that actually is regulating a whole lot of our energy systems, triggers, and we don't remember a lot of what, you know, I can't barely remember my childhood. It's like, you know, because your hypothalamus was just floored and you're in survival mode. You didn't need to put all that information into long-term recordings up here. They were being recorded as vigilance down here. You know, I was too busy surviving to actually remember stuff. And so when I get guys and we, you know, this is where meditation comes in, and I tie it into meditation very directly. And, you know, this warning, if this really rings true for you, it's like, yeah, right after that, you know, I had that incident in college, all of a sudden school got easier and I got real into perfectionism. And when you are resistant to stop, learning how to coast into home, most of this stuff is frozen in the body. And so what happens when you take a big old frozen ice cube and you throw it in a nice big bath of hot water? Boom, it explodes. And so this concept of titration, big block of frozen trauma, put into an environment that actually is really safe and warm and nurturing, we freak out. And if you ever wondered, that's why I hate, I have a hard time taking compliments and it makes me feel uncomfortable. That is actually your trauma coming up. Well, it feels like I don't deserve it. Can turn into shame, can turn into all these different kind of things where the underlying cause is trauma. Titration is this ability to actually take this block of ice and take a little dropper and just go drip. The other metaphor is a big vat of acid. We got all this acid stuck in our body. You take acid and mix it with the base, boom, it blows up. So you take a little bit of base, big old thing of vinegar, one little dropper full of baking soda, and it fizzles in it. And so why is that so important? Because it allows you to do something called integrate, or bring those new experiences into this whole being that you are. And so integration is something I talk about, know a lot about, and it's often bypassed. A lot of the trauma treatments, particularly medicine work, and, I'm going to go do 8 grams of psilocybin and see what happens. Don't, because here comes a big old vat of beautiful healing and everything else, and every bit of trauma is going to come out of your body really quick, and you're not going to know what to do with it. And so we try to bury it back down, and often it can be re-traumatizing. I'm not against, medicine work, but I think it is a tool to actually allow you to do the work. I don't think it's the work itself. And so I put a lot of warnings out there, and I don't administer it to anybody because it is, you don't need it, to tell you the truth. Through breath work and other things that I teach, you can really get this stuff out of your body. On top of all of that, that those 2 first examples of, kind of depression and also ADD and trauma could be true for everybody on this planet. Driven, and what I call driven, is a transgenerational adaptation that seems to be, and I say seems because we can't research it, but seems to be related to transgenerational trauma. And it makes sense, it's just that's my defense of everything I theorize and write about. It makes sense why the human being would adapt to that. And as Tom Hartman said in his seminal work, the Edison gene, that even if you look at bacteria or any species as a whole, there's always 3, 4, 5% that are wired for a rapidly changing environment. Because over the hundred thousands of years that we've been here, the environment usually isn't this stable. We go through ice ages and meteorites and all things happen. For the last 9,000, 10,000 years, actually 11,800, it's been a while. And the climate has been exceptionally stable. If you look at the 50 million year record, exceptionally stable. So it's allowed the human being to adapt to that world. And so that world that they adapted to is safe and stable and predictable and lots of resource. And, the agricultural world really allowed most of the human species to develop this left prefrontal executive function in their brain. But there's 3, 4, 5% of us, to mean us, the ADD, ADHD thing that we are, that has a very different brain, very different default modal network, different operating system using that brain. More importantly, we have this capacity to actually dissociate. And, dissociation, by all intensive purposes, you look at the DSM the big book of crazy that I'm not such a fan of, it really pathologizes any kind of dissociation. Well, that's not good. That's not normal. Where if you're ADD and ADHD or driven like I am, we can live in these dissociative states for years. And that is a normal way of us going through the world. Many of us get stuck in it, and there's a lot you can do about that. You don't want to be kind of fuzzy, buzzy, checked out all the time. But we also have the capacity as drivens to hyper focus, to really be here. From here to here is kind of their normal. For drivens like I am, it's from we can be completely present to completely checked out. So continuum's a lot longer. It's going to start I'm priming you for a bunch of other videos I'm making. So this connection between ADD, ADHD, the driven brain. And so this is my theory. Tom Hartman's building on it, but he didn't do the neurobiology of it, and I did. We have occipital dominance. We use our eyesight to go through the world because these things are the greatest thing to keep us safe. We have hypofrontality, so we can track multiple threats at the same time, where the normal farmer brain has, this executive function that's tuning all of that out. We don't tune it out. We also have a reward system that propels us to achieve more and more and more and more and more and more and more. Different than the rabbit running. And, I get my drivens in here and, well, I don't want to give up my fear and my trauma because I won't be motivated. Ha ha ha. Yeah, right. Actually, what happens is your focus becomes so much more direct. Your efficiency goes through the roof and you wind up doing a lot more, completing a lot more things too. And you rewire your system to the point where you're not going to sabotage it. Last couple of minutes of this, I covered a bunch of new topics coming up in videos very soon. Following this one, you'd probably be great right now. Just go jump into my, what does it mean to be driven, and kind of go into that trauma, the different 10 variables that I see as kind of continuums that overlap that make up the driven brain. And most importantly, go to amidriven.com and take my assessment. Something else ADD, ADHD driven people have is imposter syndrome. I did not want to feel like I was BSing you with this assessment. So I spent a year and a half, actually sent it out to a national norming agency to look at how normal we are versus them, us versus them kind of thing. It's real, psychologically valid. It's got good empirical reliability, internal reliability. It correlates with some other really interesting things. So it's a valid measure. If it says you're different, you are. And if you are, welcome home, man. This driven thing is the greatest gift you could ever get.